managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management, trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100. Today, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. How is your business staying one step ahead of cyber criminals? Secure your email, applications, network, and data with Barracuda. Protect your business and go from zero to security in no time flat. Whether your team is working in one location or many, Barracuda has solutions that are easy to buy, deploy, and use. Learn how Barracuda can protect your business against ransomware, phishing, and other cyber attacks. Visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Barracuda, your journey secured. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance and audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Josh Marpet and Tyler Robinson. Follow us on Twitter for live stream reminders, highlighted clips, memes, and more. You can find us at Sec Weekly. This segment is sponsored by Fortra. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Fortra. Mike Devine is Chief Marketing Officer and joined Fortra in April 2015. Mike is responsible for making sure people learn how Fortra can help them solve their IT, enterprise, and business problems. Mike has led marketing at fast-growth tech companies for many years. John Grancarich works with IT professionals we serve to develop a full understanding of their needs in light of today's complex market dynamics. John's leadership enables the Fortra team to develop and bring to life a product roadmap that ultimately makes our customers' lives better. Mike, John, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks, Matt. Good to be here. It's good to hear that Fortra in the wild, finally.
Yeah, we'll get to that soon. So we're going to talk about the rebrand of help systems to Fortra. But before we get into that, as I was saying earlier, we cover a lot of security news across the Security Weekly podcast. Enterprise Security Weekly does it every week. I actually hosted that show yesterday for Adrian, and we cover a lot of funding announcements. And then I cover it quarterly on my Security Money show on this show. And if you're not paying attention, I don't think most people realize that Help Systems has been making a ton of acquisitions over the past few years. You've been buying a lot of what were original partners, and you guys have become a great partner with us. I want to start with the background. Like, what was the strategy? What was the rationale behind this spending spree? Because you've been acquiring a ton of companies.
Yeah, great topic to start with. And so first, I'll say that I've been with now Fortra for 4.5 years, and I've been involved in about 20 acquisitions in 4.5 years. So it is definitely a high rate of activity. We've certainly all been busy for quite some time now, but I think the real question is, what's the why behind it? And the answer to that, it really goes back to when I joined the company. So when I joined here several years back, Mike and the team were already here, kind of rethinking things and really where to go next. But I'm a product manager by training. So when I came in, one of the very first things that I began to do is really to talk with the customers and try to figure out what the patterns and the trends were, where were the needs. And what we were hearing was, we've got this long history in automation and systems administration and really just helping organizations, especially around the IBM platform, be successful. But we were hearing this pull from the customers to expand what we were doing to get into more of a cybersecurity focus. So we began to really try to figure out, well, what does that mean? As we looked at the cybersecurity space, I mean, obviously it's massive, right? Massively complex, huge number of solutions, providers, what have you. And we thought about, ourselves and how the business had been successful up to that point. And when you're thinking about any long-term vision and strategy, you've got to figure out not just where you're going to focus, but just as importantly, where you're not going to focus. And so we began to look. Now, we had, at that time when I joined, we did have some cybersecurity offerings in the portfolio. It was very, very early days, though. And so when we thought about it strategically, we said, well, how do we actually go about this in a way where we're not just building for the next year or two, but actually for the next 5, 10, 15 years? How can we really architect a plan that we think would put the company on a long-term growth path? Part of that was really just trying to figure out, well, where were the core problems in security? And so we began to talk with the customers again, just trying to understand the patterns and the trends. And we kept hearing the same kind of few things over and over. And I think that's one of the interesting things is when you talk with customers, talk with 10, 20, 30, 40 customers, you don't often hear 10, 20, 30, 40 different things. It's usually the same few patterns that come up over and over. First thing we heard was vulnerabilities and threats are way, way, way up. It's basically unchecked growth. We're having a lot of difficulty figuring out how to manage against this. We saw the beginnings of what would become today's ransomware epidemic kind of taking root back then. We also heard about cost, right? So we had a lot of organizations saying, we'll work with a lot of different providers. Costs are all the way up. How can we better manage this? We looked at the resource challenge, which was something that we really began to think about. Today, if you look out at the market, what is it? It's about 3 million open cybersecurity roles around the world. Think about how hard it is to hire a single developer or IT professional. And we said to ourselves, well, you got these kind of big macro challenges that are happening out there. What could we do strategically to help address that? So rather than try to kind of play a mile wide and an inch deep, we decided to focus in on 2 key product categories, which were infrastructure protection and data security on the product side. And then over time, we began to layer in the managed services piece to really help bolster the people side of the equation. So really kind of coming at it from 2 angles, which was a focused technology strategy, as well as the managed services piece, so that we could really meet customers wherever they were in that cybersecurity journey, understand what those key problems were, and then basically partner with them and go forward with them on that path.
So I'm curious, a couple interesting questions there. Was core security part of the portfolio when you got there, John? Or was that
It was not. We acquired core security in 2019.
Got it. Okay. Because I remember having the conversations with the core security team, very similar strategy to yours, right? I was at RSA at the time, and I was working on the Archer product line, and I was looking at this bridge between Archer, the risk discussion, and what NetWitness was doing down at kind of the SIM layer. And there was this gap in the middle of being able to bring in vulnerabilities and prioritization of vulnerabilities. And so we were having conversations with core security and a couple others back in the day. I couldn't remember when you guys actually acquired it, whether when it came into the portfolio. But that was was that one of the earlier acquisitions?
That was one of the earlier acquisitions. It was actually, I believe, our first acquisition in our infrastructure protection in the infrastructure protection part of the strategy. So we saw an opportunity to really bring in core security at that time, and specifically what the team was doing around penetration testing on the software side, but also the services piece. And that has really become kind of an anchor, if you will, or a foundation for the broader offensive security and infrastructure protection strategy that we put together since then.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, Core Security was, I think, the first sponsor for Security Weekly. I believe the way Paul tells the story is they showed up at the first podcast with the beer, and that was our first sponsor. So I thank you.
Hey, in-kind sponsorships are useful,
Absolutely.
But yeah, that like John said, with core security and penetration testing, and we've added on Cobalt Strike and most recently Outflank in the Netherlands, and it's a pretty powerful combination of technology and experts.
Yeah. No, I agree. And then you brought in, so digital defense plays into that a little bit from the managed services side then, right? Because they had some very similar offerings in the portfolio as well, right?
Yeah, so the way that we began to think of it was like this. So as we were kind of building the strategy and evolving it over time. It's technology is one part of it, but then there's this people part. What we were trying to figure out was you can't just really focus on one. So how do we best bring a set of technologies and products to market that also reflects the realities of what's happening with the workforce? And what I mean is this. So when we look at digital defense, primarily for us, that's vulnerability management. You look at core security, and at that time, that was primarily really penetration testing, products and services. And then you look at something like Cobalt Strike, which is really adversary simulation and red teaming focused. But if you line those up left to right, so going from vulnerability management to pen testing to red teaming, they actually loosely go from more automated to more hands-on. And we kind of had this aha moment, which said, wait a second, we can not only bring these technologies together and interoperate and integrate them over time, but also work with our customers and basically say, depending on where you are in your own team's journey, we've got some customers who are really focused on more of an automated type of approach, which fits great in the vulnerability management world. Then we have some really sophisticated customers who've got, highly trained operators on their team. They may have come from military or other agencies, and these are hands-on people who really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it. We can kind of meet them anywhere in the journey, but also bring together that more complete solution. That was when I think we began to figure out, well, if we can think of things more holistically like this across not just infrastructure protection, but across data security and managed services, we think we might have something here that could be really useful over the long term.
Is that where the value add and the add-ons and some of the other acquisitions around, say, phishing protection and email security, is that when that evolution started to happen from a company standpoint?
It did. And I think one of the things we did that worked really well was we were really disciplined, and we still are to this day. We think really carefully about what that more complete value proposition is. So when we look, and today I think if you look at the cybersecurity market, what is it? It's got 4,500 plus providers of some flavor of software, services, what have you. What we asked ourselves, what could we do? You can't solve all of it. No company can solve all of it. But what could we do within the product categories we were focused on to do something more comprehensive, right? So to your point about phish labs and phishing, we see email still today, obviously, as a key threat vector. What could we do to provide as complete and comprehensive of protection in that vector as possible? So we kept taking that same thinking that we were kind of perfecting with infrastructure protection, evolve it, move it to the next part of the strategy, and just really kind of push it forward, but evolving it all along the way and figuring out what that more complete value proposition would look like over time.
Yeah, that's great. And a great way to think about it. I have a new one for you. We can talk offline about called human risk management, but we can talk about that later because you got some really interesting products in the portfolio.
Stop plugging.
Sorry, I had to do it.
Can I?
I look forward to hearing about it.
I've got a question for you. So I love the strategy behind the acquisitions. That makes a lot of sense to me. I got to tell you that. But my problem always with firms that go in an acquisition, no offense, a binge, is that either they become a group of autonomous companies that are all loosely connected and really don't work together, or they lose their way. They become a shell of what they once were. I've very rarely seen companies that can consolidate into an autonomous, not an autonomous whole, but a harmonious whole, I think is the word I'm looking for. Can I ask your opinion on that in your particular instance?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've done since the beginning, this goes back to my comment before about being disciplined and focused, is while we were building the product strategy, beginning to execute it, we were in parallel building a platform strategy. So one of the things that we saw was, we had a view, and we still do today, that in the future, cybersecurity really becomes a platform world. And we know that this pendulum between best of breed and platform, it can kind of, go back and forth at times. But when you look at the skill shortage, when you look at how kind of busy the market is, what's happening on the threat side, we have to find a way to simplify and synthesize and bring together not branded products over time, but key capabilities and get those to work together. So we began to lay the strategic foundation 4 years ago for a platform. And it was, me and a bunch of people sitting in a room saying, hey, what do we think the future looks like and why? And why do we think this could work and where could we go wrong? And so we began to kind of put those building blocks into place as we've gained more experience, as we've studied the industry and talked with more customers. We've asked ourselves, well, how do we bring that to life? And how do we make sure that we push it forward? So one of the things that we're focused on is when you look across any product category, right? And this could be infrastructure protection, data security, what have you. You have to also look at it from the perspective of not just what the capabilities are, but who's actually going to be sitting behind the console. So we've got a shortage of 3 million cybersecurity professionals around the world. We're not going to hire 3 million people. It's just not going to happen. There's just not enough trained people out there.
What, you don't have a budget? Come on, man.
I'm tapped out. Short. So the question is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? So if you can't hire 3 million more people, you have to find a way to take the professionals that you have and amplify what they do. And you have to push yourself in that uncomfortable direction that says, hey, you know what? We're not quite sure what it looks like. But one thing I know is we've got to take the prototypical cybersecurity professional and enable that person to accomplish 10, 15, 20 times more. How do you do that? One of the ways that we're going to do that from the platform side is to actually look at all the redundancy, right? So if you look at cybersecurity, where's the redundancy? Agents, dashboards, alerts. All this noise, all this redundancy, all this duplication. We're in the fortunate position because we had a platform strategy kind of in parallel to the product strategy that we can now basically say, okay, we've really made tremendous progress on the product side of it. How do we begin to bring some of these core capabilities into a platform world? So, for example, we have some redundancy in vulnerability management. We're going to have one solution. It's going to be digital defenses. VM solution is going to be our center of gravity. We're going to take complementary VM capabilities from other solutions, bring them together. Now we have one Fortra VM solution. We're going to do the same thing in other areas of the company. And I think that's how we answer that problem, Josh, that you're talking about. Is you systematically go through, look for those opportunities, and just step your way through. Same as we did on the product side, pretty much.
Okay, so you're not gonna distinguish by platform. You're not gonna have a vulnerability management solution for containers, for virtual machines, for on-prem. You're gonna say this is our vulnerability management solution, and have it be widespread enough to cover all possible or anything that you choose to be inside of your deployment, your useful bits, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's another part of the strategy, which is really this focus around hybrid IT or hybrid cloud. So about 3 years ago, we were studying this problem too, of the cloud and what did we think the cloud's role was going to be going forward. And at that time, I think there was a tremendous amount of industry focus on the public cloud and that there would be, just really kind of the sea change and everybody would be in the public cloud. And if you didn't get there all the way, you're going to get left behind. We're out there, we're talking to customers, and I specifically remember talking to one of the top 10 investment banks in the world, and we were talking about the cloud. And he asked me what our strategy was, in terms of the cloud. And I explained, we're really kind of focused on hybrid because we think that the world is going to be this ever-evolving mix of public cloud, private cloud, containerization, virtualization, data center, and that mix is always going to be changing. And his response was, it's really great that you guys are thinking like that because I'm here to tell you the world's never going to be all cloud and certain companies are going to always be hybrid. Now today, that was a difficult strategic decision for us because it wasn't clear at that time that the world would, without question be hybrid, but we believed it based on the data that we had and our experience. Today, by our estimate, 85% of companies are running some form of hybrid, model, infrastructure, what have you. So we're going in the right direction, but we want to make it as simple as possible for customers to partner with us in the future, for example, for vulnerability management or something else, and for us to be as agnostic as we reasonably can be and say, whether it's Windows, Mac, Linux, what have you, go for it, and we want you to have those capabilities.
So, John, you said something that is a great transition point over to Mike, which is we're not going to sell a bunch of branded products, right? The challenge you have, because you've made so many acquisitions, is you have 20 plus brands now under the umbrella. So Mike, I assume this is some of the thought process into, well, what do we do with these brands? Do we leave them as individual brands? Do we rebrand? I'd love to understand kind of the thought process as you were thinking about, okay, we're going to reposition ourselves as a new company name, Fortra in this particular case. Walk us through kind of some of the thoughts and the decision process to move there, because I know a lot of companies struggle with this.
Yeah, and it's a good question, and it's a rebrand is not for the faint of heart. And John and I and a handful of others were sitting around a little over a year ago saying, we kind of have in this existential moment, like, who are we now? Who have we become? And who do we want to be? And what are we leaning into? And we kind of said, we don't really feel like the help systems we were a few years ago. We're a very different company today. And so we wanted to start the process. We did the process started with, okay, we need to kind of rebrand ourselves as a different help systems. And the more we got into it, the more momentum we got to just completely change the name and come up with a name that matched all of the stuff that John's been talking about, which is, not only technology to help cybersecurity professionals, but people to help them get their nights and weekends back. And so, we thought we can be a cybersecurity ally. We were great problem solvers. We've got a heck of a crew. And so we said, we want a name that matches that leans into those aspirations. And so we think Fortra, has kind of roots in Forte, which is strength. And it sounds a little bit like fortress or fort, which is protection. And the way we've got it stylized, we're really stoked about it. The triangle for A is a very strong shape, and it's also the Greek delta, which symbolizes positive change. And so we got kind of excited about, we're bringing positive change to cybersecurity. And then I'll say, to your comment on all these different brands, and what Josh mentioned at a great point, like, the dirty little secret of M&A is integration, right? I mean, there are all sorts of pitch decks, there are all sorts of board presentations. This is going to be great, but when you get these organizations to work together, we got playbooks, and we got all sorts of playbooks, and we can run a playbook. But guess what? Every time it's different because they're different companies, they do different things, they operate in different spaces, and we don't buy companies just to buy companies. We buy companies to round out a portfolio or a geo presence and grow. And so we spent an awful lot of time on that. We realized not only, like I said earlier, that we were becoming like, holy crap, we're like a cybersecurity powerhouse together here. But we realized that we need to start, I kept saying, we need to major in help systems and minor in Go Anywhere, major in help systems and minor in Digital Guardian. And no matter how much I talked about that, it was hard to really affect that change. And so we think it's still going to be tricky, but I think a name change like this, a strong name change that inside the company, there's just an excitement and a movement really, that it'll be easier to major in Fortra and minor in Alert Logic, if you will.
Well, that strategy plays very well into what CISOs and executives are looking for currently. They're on this path of getting under a trusted partner and having the ability to have a portfolio of options to work with, as well as being, we've been doing this scale at all costs with all the VCs and startups. Now we have to scale back and leverage, our resources way better. And so that portfolio is really a good strategy, bringing all of this together in a time that you couldn't have foreseen 4 years ago, but is in a very good spot today as you guys move forward.
Yeah, and I'll just say, it's kind of a marketer's dream, not to sound cliche, but like John and others have, masterminded this M&A plan, and every time they come to us with another, I'm like, God, that works great. That fits beautifully. And, especially as we talk about being your cybersecurity ally, I was just talking to one of our managed services guys yesterday, and the way we help all sorts of companies by, being their SOC for them or taking down phishing sites that are ruining their brand. We're really helping these folks out. And so, by acquiring these technologies and these experts behind the technologies, it makes it kind of easy for us. We just need to tell people about it.
I want to point out, by the way, that a great answer. And have you mapped yourself against the cyber defense matrix? I've got to ask that because I deal with this literally all the time.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. So you're familiar with NIST CSF, NIST Cybersecurity Framework? A gentleman named Sunil Yu, a friend of mine, actually expanded it to the Cyber Defense Matrix. And it really maps out a set of capabilities according to the NIST CSF. So what you cover in the NIST CSF, I'd be fascinated to see how you do in that matrix. And I think it'd be great press.
Yeah, one thing we have done is we've taken, I think, version 1.0 of the NIST cyber framework, and we did a mapping several months ago of the solutions we had at that time. Obviously, we've expanded it and grown a bit since then, but we actually were able to, and it's obviously a very complex framework. The core framework is quite complex and sophisticated, but we were able to really, quote unquote, check a number of those, well, actually boxes across all 5 of the categories, but it also showed us areas where we could bolster further. So we kind of see it from the perspective of, hey, great, we've made really good progress here, but it also focused us in on some additional opportunities that we could potentially pursue going forward.
Absolutely. Oh, and by the way, going back to your hybrid comment, so well done. I mean, do you know how many of the top, say, 50 banks have a mainframe or a mini computer still? It would be all of them, just to be clear. So your hybrid comment
We
is
hear that all the time.
very, very well said. Absolutely correct.
I bet you do. So now that you've got Fortra, the new brand out there, the new company name, what's the message to the market now, right? Because you've got an opportunity that not many companies get, right? Very broad portfolio, lots of acquisitions, rebranding. What's the message to the market? What is that message to the CISO that you want to get out there to show how you can provide value to this audience, right? Because I think you are in a really interesting position now to be able to do that. Mike, I'd love to understand, like, what is that message out to the market? What do you want people to take away? Because the one thing I want this audience to know is where does Fortra sit on their radar for their future?
Yeah, good question. We've got a fair amount of educating to do. We think we have a fantastic opportunity our tagline is your cybersecurity ally. And, ally is meaning a lot of great things in pop culture today. And I think we've got a tremendous opportunity, like I said earlier, to give some of these guys their nights and weekends back. And it's super complex. John just mentioned the NIST framework. If you've got to manage that is not an easy job. And we're not professing to be the ultimate experts of all it, but we can absolutely help. And so we're here to help. And guess what? Customers don't come and say, let me implement the entire portfolio. They don't do that, surprise. But more and more they're saying, here's what I have, here are my issues. And then smart people like John say, well, let's test out adding this or adding that. So I think in a lot of cases it's, where are you guys sitting today? What do you have? What are your gaps? And is there a way we can help? And so we're excited about that. We think as we did our research and talking to customers and talking to prospects, what they're looking for, like we talked earlier, they want fewer vendors. They want things to be a little simpler. Yet, and I think there's an angle too of, let's not just doom scroll all the time. I mean, I think there's a tendency for us to just doom scroll in life. Like I was on Twitter last night. Oh my God, what's going to happen? But, we need to stand up and say, hey, I don't want to stick my head in the sand and say there are no problems in cybersecurity. There are tremendous problems, but let's start chipping away at this and let's help each other. And, let's shoot for a brighter day. I think it's possible.
I agree with you. We've had enough gloom and doom and ambulance chasing in this industry for all of us to have enough, right? I mean, so I think a very positive message to the market, a very needed message to the market, because we know CISOs are struggling with 60, 70 different vendors. They want to consolidate. They're being asked to pinch. Right? We had our CISO advisory board a couple of weeks ago down in Austin, and we were asking about budgets, and they said they're flat. We're not going to get a lot of budget, but we're looking at where do we offset costs to get monies and dollars that we need to make future investments. And it started this whole string around minimum viable security. Infrastructure protection, data protection are minimal viable security things. These are things people have to do. And if you can come to the market with a set of capabilities that solve a lot of their problems, it's a really positive way to go to the market, because now I can get rid of maybe 4 or 5 different vendors and focus on one because I get what I need. So John, I'd love to understand, like, how does this now under Fortra and all the things that you've done, what do you think about the kind of the future strategy? Like, where do you go next? Are there some other things that are really interesting for Fortra?
So I think, when we kind of push it forward, right? So what's interesting is, as we mentioned, we've been around, this company's been around for 40 years, but we didn't leave, the what we did before behind. It's actually the opposite. We're going to pull it forward. And there's an interesting opportunity here, probably once in a generation opportunity, which is we get to bring the thing that we became great at, automation, into the new direction we're going in. And when we talk, and we're doing this on our own SOC as well, which is basically bringing automation in. This is a key element of where we go forward, whether it's products or platform. You look at that skill shortage, if you actually inventory what a SOC team does every day, and you kind of stack ranked it, and at the top, it was the most complex, planning intensive strategic stuff at the top, and the high volume, routine, repetitive stuff at the bottom. Imagine what's possible just by automating that. And so we believe that part of the future is actually bringing automation into security operations and enabling these unbelievably talented professionals who, to Mike's point, are frustrated, who are burned out, who need some relief, and let them offload some of this to automation so that they can actually focus on more of the interesting stuff, the architecture, the strategy, what have you. We're doing that ourselves. We're actually bringing automation into our own SOC. So we're perfecting it in our own environment first before we actually bring it out and commercialize it wide scale. But that's one thing that for sure is going to be a huge focus for us. A second thing is really around threat intelligence. So we're in this unique position between all the different acquisitions. This kind of goes back to my point before about really stepping back and taking stock of what we have. We have lots and lots of great threat intelligence, whether it's from our own product telemetry, whether it's from customers or open source, what have you. We're bringing all that together in something we're going to call the Threat Fusion Center, and think of it as basically a centralized threat intelligence service. Now, threat intelligence isn't new. There's obviously quite a bit of really useful threat intelligence out there. What we're going to do that's different is actually use that centralized threat intelligence service to make our products smarter. So by starting with infrastructure protection and data security products, we created these complete solutions. We're pulling threat intel from these very solutions, including our managed services offerings. We're going to basically curate it, package it back up, and put it back into all the products. But the difference is that these products will be ingesting a much more complete set of threat intelligence than they ever had before. The benefit to the customer is basically up to the date intelligence across threat vectors. And I think that's what's different is we have to think about things more holistically, right? I think going forward, and this is where the whole platform piece comes into, anything that we can do to remove the silos, to make things work more cohesively together, that's what we want to do. And so that's really part of the key platform strategy is basically how do we unify as much of this together into a single experience, remove those silos. And I think we are super, super excited about that part of it. And it's not going to be easy. I think if it was easy, somebody would have solved it already. But that's why we're putting ourselves on the job, because we're psyched and we want to get it done.
Well, I think it's important for people to understand. To get to automation, you've got to have all the things integrated together. If you've already done the integration components, which you have as part building out the platform, you're in a much better position to do the automation, because if you're piecing a bunch of different vendors together, there's a ton of integration work that has to happen before the automation step. You guys having solved that makes the automation step a little easier. And if you can solve the holistic threat intel use case, like hallelujah, brother, because I know customers struggle with the how many more feeds do I need to get my threat intel?
All the feeds.
And I think for us, like if we had to boil it down, what are we trying to really accomplish here? It's improving security maturity and decreasing operational overhead together, right? And so how do we create more value while lowering the overhead, the burden on the teams? That's the big nut we want to crack here. And so all these pieces that we've talked about, we think of these as kind of core building blocks, right? All the different products, the security awareness piece, the managed services, it all really comes together. And so Mike and I and the team, we've got, literally 3,000 people working on this, in all different ways. It's amazing to see this mass of people all unified in a common direction. And we're just incredibly excited about what's possible here.
That's a much different starting point than most companies have. You guys have the control from owning all of these companies and having acquired strategic companies where other people are relying on other feeds, other products, other integrations. That's a much different starting point to begin that fusion center, which I'm super excited about now.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add is, basically everything that's core to that value proposition of increasing security maturity and decreasing operational overhead, we either want to buy it or we want to build it. And we talk about this stuff all the time. Speed is critical, right? We have to always be aware of how fast the market is moving and how do we stay in lockstep with that and ideally get ahead of it. So wherever we can buy and accelerate a result, we're going to do that. But for things like the platform, which frankly doesn't exist, we're building that all ourselves. So it's this combination of buy and build kind of working together and reinforcing each other.
It's a great strategy. Mike, John, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Great talking to you guys. Thanks for having us.
If you need a cybersecurity ally or want to learn more about Fortra, please visit securityweekly.com/Fortra. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.